America will not have the future we want if we're not willing to clean up the past. These are the words of the iconic spiritual teacher and author Marianne Williamson, who has been a guest on my show for the past 2 decades and was the most Googled candidate after the first Democratic presidential debates. Marianne has been responsible for helping me personally uplevel my non-political conversation over the years, from how can I make a difference with my congressperson to now I understand why we need to bring a healing conversation into American politics. Welcome, my friend Marianne. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So can we talk about, first of all, some of the memes that you have introduced onto the political stage that have not been heard in this way before? The word love, morality, spiritual awakening. These words have not been heard on a political platform before. What has your experience been pioneering these words on this worldwide political stage?
Well, first of all, they've very much been heard before. All I'm doing is articulating for our time the philosophy of political nonviolence that Mahatma Gandhi first created and used in the Indian independence movement. And then Martin Luther King went over to India and he studied those principles and he brought them for application to the civil rights movement during the 1960s in the United States. Dr. King said it is time for a new dimension of love to be injected into the veins of human civilization. I don't think people call them a New Age nutcase. Oh, whack job for that. You know, this is something that is an old political philosophy, the idea that there is a force inside every man, woman, and child. That's what Gandhi said, that there is a force of love inside us all that not only heals our personal relationships, but heals all political and economic relationships as well. So, to me, I'm not introducing something new. I'm talking about, first of all, a well-established political philosophy that has just been sidelined in the United States over the last few decades. That's number one. Number two, the issue of public morality is also something where it's simply aberrational that we're not talking about those things. Traditionally in the United States, we understood that public policy should be good, that it should not just be about economic principle devoid of any ethical or moral consideration. When you're talking about war, when you're talking about economics, when you're talking about criminal justice, these political conversations should be guided by conscience, no differently than our individual behavior should be guided by conscience. And it's only in this last few decades that we've become so corporatized and over-secularized in our political conversation that has not been true. So I'm really the traditional one here. I'm just talking about what, people in the United States used to talk about. Is it a good thing for the United States to do?
And that's
the way that
the
way we have. I'm sorry. The way we have separated political issues from conversations of right versus wrong. The way we have separated political issues from ethics and public morality and a sense of responsibility for our fellow human being, a sense of moral responsibility to the planet. What I'm talking about should be seen as common sense.
Well,
and it is seen as common sense in our individual lives, and it should be seen as common sense in our politics as well.
It has definitely struck a chord with the American people, because your incredible nerve that you've hit with the American people, they are listening. They understand the sound of truth. They hear the words of love. They feel the words of love. They want these words. And you can tell, I'm sure, by the people that you meet in your rallies, in the airports, wherever you are. What has your experience been when you speak to the people, to the American people?
Well, when I'm at events, I feel very heard because the American people are good, decent people. This is when I talk about how we should do right by a fellow human being, how we should live according to the dictates of conscience. I don't even need to tell people that. This is where people live.
Yeah.
My message is simply, why wouldn't we do that collectively? All that politics is our collective behavior. So if we know that in our individual lives, we should try to be loving, we should try to be compassionate, we should try to be good, which is where the vast majority of us already live.
Yes.
The message I'm having here is that public policy should be guided by that as well. And what has happened over the last few decades is that our public policy has become so divergent from our basic goodness as human beings. You know, when you have a political system that has been so corrupted by huge financial forces that put short-term gain for multinational corporations before the well-being of people, before the well-being of workers, before the well-being of community or an environment or a planet, it's soulless, and it leads to chaos, and it leads to suffering. And we see it. How many more times do we have to see it? How many more Boeing Max disasters do we have to see before we ask, why wasn't the FAA looking out for our safety before just playing footsies underneath the table with Boeing? Mm-hmm. When you look at something like the opioid disaster and you ask, why wasn't the FDA watching out for American safety rather than obviously playing footsies under the table and looking the other way while predatory big pharma was over manufacturing and over marketing painkillers? So when you look at so much of what's going on in the United States today, which has to do with millions of hungry children and homeless children and terrible environmental desecration and criminal injustice and so much more of our resources spent on war than on building peace, then at some point the American people have got to wake up and step in and intervene and change course.
Well, the exposure has been massive of these topics. We have heard now more, there's entire industries that have been exposed and are breaking down. The housing industry, the banking industry, we're looking under the hood now more than ever, which is why this is one of the most important elections of our time. And I'd love to know what your calling was to put your name in this race, to go through all that you're going through with the DNC and the mischaracterizations and everything that you're dealing with as a human being. What fuels you, Marianne?
My heart said to do this. And my heart said to wake up this morning and to do it again.
Yeah, every morning.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's really up to the people to decide right now. If people send in, because campaigns are about the money. Do you have the money to pay your campaign manager? Do you have the money to pay your digital director? Do you have the money to pay for the travel? Do you have the money to pay for the field organizers? Do you have the money to pay for the infrastructure that it takes to mount a presidential campaign? And ours is tiny compared to that of the other candidates. And of course, now we have one billionaire who can put $34 million of his own money into ads and so forth.
Let's look at what you have done, though, Marianne. You have grown exponentially since you have started this race. Your fundraising is more than you have ever done before. I mean, it is, if you look at just your campaign, you are growing. That is 100% true.
Well, that is 100% true, and the growth that we did, pays the bills that we had.
Yeah.
So at this point, to be honest, it's really a matter of whether or not people want to keep it going now, because it would take a real infusion of cash to keep it going now. I want to keep it going because when I'm actually out there with people, I'm thinking of the events I did today. I feel we're having a conversation that matters. Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about the things that matter. So today we're talking about the fact, Gandhi said the end is inherent in the means. And the traditional political conversation in our country today is so superficial. It is so devoid of the deeper conversation about cause rather than just symptom, a deeper conversation about the whole person aspects of healthcare, for instance. Not just how we're going to pay for healthcare, but how we're going to get healthy.
Yes.
Not just how we're going to prepare for war, but how we're going to wage peace. Not just how we're going to distract ourselves from millions of chronically traumatized children, but how we're going to rescue them. how we're going to do more than just tweaking environmental policy, but actually have a massive mass mobilization to reverse climate change, and how we're going to make a real difference in the racial turbulence that so plagues our country, and pay reparative measures for Black people and also Native Americans. There are many people, I think, who sense, that is my experience, there are many people who sense that we have to do more than just random acts of kindness now. We need to do huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. We need to bring back public policy in the United States with our own moral compass of our democracy and of our humanitarian values. This conversation, I know, matters because it speaks to the heart. And I feel that it's that level of moral repair that will right this ship.
Yes.
So I hope to stay. I hope that people, to be honest, many people, I think, I meet so many people who say, I support you. And I'm kind of thinking, well, did you write a check? I think a lot of people in the higher consciousness movement, Lisa, aren't in the habit of not only of political engagement, but part of the habit that you build with political engagement is financial engagement. So I think sometimes people don't realize what their $10 can do. I think people don't realize what they're writing a letter to their peeps and saying, I saw a letter that someone wrote today, and she teaches Persian literature. And she wrote the most beautiful letter to her mailing list and she clearly is a Bernie Sanders supporter, but she was saying, I want this woman in the race. And she was comparing my campaign to Hafiz and the fine wine of love that is necessary in order for our politics to be uplifted. It was so beautiful. And she said, come on, guys, send $10. And I hope that our people will do that, because otherwise we will have to stop sooner than I would want to.
Tell me about these numbers. You have more individual donors that have lower amounts that have donated to your campaign. And then I don't know the comparison to the other campaigns. They have fewer donors with larger amounts because we've got private money in public campaigns. But you have individuals that are...
Our average donation is about $22. And I think a lot of people don't realize the difference that their $22 can make.
Tell us.
The difference that's what campaigns are based on. And that's true of people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders as well. We're not people who are getting huge corporate PAC money, obviously. The corporate money is going to other candidates.
Yes.
But then on the other hand, some of these other candidates who are more progressive, they're established candidates. People are in the habit of giving them money. And also, like I said, I think, it's funny because, once again, talking about the whole higher consciousness community, we do talk about the energy of money. But once again, because it's a community that has not been very politically engaged, part of what you learn when you start becoming involved in politics, even just as an activist, not as a candidate, is that when people run for office, it's so obscene in this country until we have public funding of federal campaigns, which is what we should have.
It would be a totally different environment.
It would be totally different.
Mm-hmm.
But until we do, as long as Citizens United has not been overturned, as long as money has been declared free speech, then, hey, guys, if you want it, you're going to have to pay for it. And I think that that's a shift.
Exactly what I was saying. The $22 goes such a long way. It's enormous. And it's more than that. It's a vote for what it means to have public funding into campaigns, and it really means something. It means a lot more than just the $22. It's a support of that program. You've been talking about getting private money out of public campaigns on my radio show for decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even when I ran for Congress, the money in politics was the pillar of my campaign, because the undue influence of money in our politics is the cancer underlying all the other cancers. So when you have the money that comes from health insurance companies, and the money that comes from big pharmaceutical companies, and the money that comes from food and chemical companies, and the money that comes from agricultural companies, and the money that comes from gun manufacturers, and the money that comes from oil and gas, and the money that comes from defense contractors, as the economic bottom line, and when the political establishment is beholden to those forces for its donations, then what happens is you end up with a system of legalized bribery, where the government does more to advocate for short-term profit for those forces than it does for us. And the only way to counter that is for the people to step in. The only way to counter that is for the people to put our money where our mouth is and for us to vote. That's the only way to counter this, is to elect someone and to elect people who are willing to turn this ship around.
So let's talk about some of the issues, and how would you get the money for the issues that you're talking about, like reparations, like your healthcare system? How would that money come in if it weren't through private funding?
Okay, so this is the issue. We have had, for the last 40 years, we have had a situation where a philosophy called trickle-down economics has guided our economic functioning. And it is the idea that corporations should be able to do whatever they need to do to increase short-term profits for their stockholders, even if that's at the expense of the workers and the environment and the community.
Yeah.
What this has done is that it has caused a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a small group of people. In the 1970s, we did not have a problem with wealth inequality in the United States. But over the last 40 years, we have had this massive transfer of wealth to the point where, first of all, we have the largest income inequality since 1929, and we have 1% of Americans now owning more wealth than the bottom 90%.
Yes.
And what this has done is to create tremendous, tremendous suffering, because millions and millions of people live in chronic economic anxiety.
Stress, yes.
93 million people living near poverty. 93 million people living near poverty means such anxiety, not knowing what will happen if you get sick or your children get sick, or how you'll send your kids to college, or how you'll get out from under those college loans.
Anything,
so
yes.
This is,
and nothing can go wrong. There's no margin for error. Yes.
Right. Exactly. $400 or $500 and anything could happen. You could end up homeless. Okay. So this is what we need to do. There was a $2 trillion tax cut in 2017 that gives 83 cents of every dollar to the richest people and corporations. This is not an economic stimulus, which is how it was sold.
Right.
In fact, there's no evidence it will even pay for itself. That should be repealed. Although the middle class tax part of it should be put back in, because that was a good idea and should have been there to begin with. Okay, that's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is you stop those subsidies. We paid $26 billion in subsidies to oil and gas alone last year.
Yeah.
These people are making billions of dollars in profits. We know that what is costing us as a society, what's happening because of the planet, but we're giving them $26 billion in subsidies. And that's because, for instance, last year, the oil and gas lobbied Washington to the tune of $125 million. I mean, the whole thing is so corrupt, you don't even believe it.
In the meantime, all of the renewable sources of energy are being squashed and rolled back. Yes, which is
Next
criminal.
thing we need to do is for the United States government to be able to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. We have people in the United States who cannot afford their insulin. Yeah. This is the richest country in the world. Yeah. Next thing we need to do is to make sure that our military spending is commensurate with our legitimate security needs. Because right now, there are billions, hundreds of billions of dollars above our legitimate, what we spend on legitimate security needs, that has to do with just short-term profits for defense contractors. And then you say to people of $1 billion, I agree with the idea of 3% tax on those who have assets of $1 billion. I agree with a 2% tax on the assets of people who have over 50 million. And then we have cash on hand. I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of our children, Lisa. We have 13 million hungry children. We have millions of American children who go to school every day, in schools, in classrooms where they don't even have adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased.
Yes.
So we need a massive realignment. I want to stop the process by which we base our educational funding on property taxes. And I want every school in America to be a palace of culture and learning and the arts. So I want a whole department of children and youth, because these vulnerabilities, these challenges, they completely overwhelm our
Yes.
Department of Education, and our Department of Health and Human Services. So we could do this. We need trauma-informed education. We need community wraparound services. We need violence prevention. We need anti-bullying. We need a whole new level of mental health services, not only for the children, but for their families also. We need mindfulness in the schools.
Yes.
There is so much we need to do.
Yes.
We need to rescue these children no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster.
We need to stop the school to prison pipeline in underserved communities.
Well, that's what that is.
Prison
that's
reform,
right.
Everything. There's so many things to do. It's almost difficult to figure out where to start, but there is so many imbalances that we have, a $1 billion diet industry, and that yet you say 13 million children starving. There are so many imbalances. You have to, how is it that people can't see that? However, there is, let's talk about that.
Well, I think people can see that. I think people can see that, Lisa. I say it every talk. I said it at my talk this morning. I say to audiences, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, because I talk about that. I talk about the fact that we spend so much money on more on war than on peace. I talk about the situation with race. I talk about so much that's like harrowing. And then I say to people, there's nothing here you don't know.
Right.
This is not about people not knowing. This is about the moment in which we're living is about owning up to what we know. The moment in which we're living is having the courage. That's what the abolitionists had. That was the difference between us and the abolitionists. They had courage. That's the difference between us and the women's suffragettes. They had courage. That's the difference between us and the civil rights movement. They had courage. It's time for us to have courage. We have the data. We have the information. What we need to do is stop pretending that the political establishment is going to fix all this. The political establishment created all this.
Yeah.
The status quo perpetuates itself. It's time for the people to step in. That's what happened with women's suffrage. That's what happened with civil rights. That's what happened with abolition. It's our time, Lisa. And I think
I couldn't agree with you more, but we've got to look at where would we start. Look at the situations that you've had with the DNC, and the laws continue to change, and the rules get made up as you go along, and you get omitted from that debate and this debate. Sometimes, and I'm speaking from personal experience. Yes, I know the issues. Yes, I want to make a difference. Yes, I have the courage. And then there's a law that changes. There's a block that happens.
No, that right now, if you want a president who represents these ideas, then you elect the president who represents these ideas. Now, the president does not have a magic wand, which right now, thank God,
we're learning.
But the laws of the United States don't represent a goalpost that's going to change once somebody gets into the White House.
Right.
I think one of the things also in terms of the higher consciousness community, I think because the conventional politics is so toxic for all the reasons that we've said, some of the most enlightened thinkers haven't wanted anything to do with it.
Right.
So what happens then is some of the most enlightened, forward-moving, spiritually and emotionally and psychologically progressive people have distanced, chronic disengagement from politics, which only made politics more toxic, which only made people want to disengage from it more. Now, you took the opposite direction. But a lot of people that you and I know just became more and more disengaged from politics the more toxic politics became, which made us more disengaged. And now I think everybody's woken up. Everybody gets in this country.
It's a
We're
process.
In trouble now.
Yes. And the conversations that you're having, if you were up against Donald Trump, how could you have this conversation of love against someone who publicly defames people, insults people, who really doesn't reflect that type of morality in his own conversations? How would that look?
You don't have a conversation of love against that. You just have a conversation of love. The American people don't need me to tell them who Donald Trump is or what he's about. I heard one of my fellow candidates on TV the other day saying in an ad, I'm going to prove that he's a fraud and a liar. And I thought, to who? Who doesn't know? I mean, everybody I know knows. They either think it's horrifying and they're going to vote for the Democrat no matter what, or they go, yeah, but I like what he's doing.
Right. Yeah, but. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think anybody doesn't know. I don't think people need me to tell them who the president is. And I believe that a lot of good people, look, the people who totally are in love with the president are going to vote for the president. This is a free country. They have the right to do that. But I do believe that there are millions of people who did vote for him, who are at least disturbed. And if all we do is go on and on about how bad he is,
Right.
then
Yes.
that scolds them. That's shaming them.
And it's not the
That's
conversation that we're having of love at all. And it
no,
doesn't move us forward.
it's about presenting an alternative. It's about
Yes.
presenting an alternative.
More people in the United States need independent investigative journalism and coverage more than ever before. And we have chosen here at Free Speech TV an approach that allows us to keep our programs free for all. And that is why we are asking for your support. If you can donate $120, we will gift you A Politics of Love, Marianne Williamson's amazing book about a handbook for a new American revolution. It allows us to keep independent journalism alive and to deliver honest, empowering reporting every single day. That is our commitment at The Aware Show News, and we are asking for your support by donating $120 for Marianne Williamson's book, A Politics of Love. We really need a new whole person politics of love that stems not just from the head, but from the heart, as Marianne was saying, not just from an intellectual understanding, but from a genuine affection for one another, for humanity. In this book, it is a call to arms. It's the activist in you, from the spiritual leader, New York Times bestselling author Marianne Williamson, who wrote A Return to Love. She confronts politics and a politics of fear and divisiveness more than we have ever seen before. So please pledge your support right now. $120 is Marianne Williamson's A Politics of Love. How are you? And in terms of just a human being, how do you pick yourself up every day, Marianne, and not take offense to the mischaracterizations? We don't even need to go there on this show because there's enough coverage about that. What do you do? How do you use the Course in Miracles and all that you've taught for decades to manifest what your intentions are, Marianne, and to keep going?
Well, I have two things I want to say to that. First of all, a presidential campaign is a job interview. It's a very long job interview. Okay. And I think people, when we're looking to see who we're going to vote for, particularly for something like president, we're looking to see more than just what that person's policies are. We're looking to see who that person is. And if I'm going to be completely taken out of the game because I'm beaten up by reporters who lie about me, how would you trust that I could take on foreign policy?
Right.
I mean,
right.
People need to see I'm tougher than crumbling underneath that kind of stuff. That's number one. Number two, to be honest, I don't think that the truth about who I am has been covered enough. And that's one of the places where I would hope that people in our community would do more. I'm not anti-medicine, and I'm not anti-science, and I'm not crazy. And I think some of the worst part of it has been my not seeing enough people saying, hey, I've known her for many years, and that's not what she is.
Yes.
So...
Yes, and that is a wonderful thing. I mean, I have known you for decades, and you have been saying these same things that you've been saying on air for 20 years with me. And so I do know your character, and I do know that you've also ushered me into a conversation that I didn't think I could have, like many of the people in the spiritual community, and I still don't think I can have. I'm learning. And that is every day. I'm learning, I'm listening, I'm educating myself. And I still don't feel as strong as I need to feel politically, but I am willing to. And that's the biggest thing, is that I'm constantly a student of this, and I want to make a difference. And that's where my heart stands, and it's where your heart has always stood. So when you deal with these opportunities, what I've really loved seeing, this is where the truth comes out, is you and the other Democratic candidates have created a wonderful camaraderie. I see it in the back end where you're supporting each other, and Andrew Yang is supporting you, and you're speaking with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And what has that been like?
Joe Biden has been wonderful. Mm-hmm. Bernie's been wonderful. Elizabeth's been wonderful. Andrew's been wonderful. Corey's been wonderful. And Tulsi's been wonderful. Okay, that covers it. Well, I know that's
That makes sense. You have created some friends there.
Figure out the rest.
Yeah, I got it. But you've created, I think that's amazing that you are all in the same conversation and you're all...
Beto was wonderful too.
Beto is wonderful too. Well, you've been trying to, you have been in the conversation with each other, all really pretty much trying to do the same thing, which is uplift America. And you have been...
These are wonderful people. These are lovely people. I don't feel like I'm running against anyone. I feel I'm running with a lot of really good, smart people.
That's really great.
I don't think that you can run unless you feel that you'd be the best person for the job. I think that's true of all of us. They're all telling the truth. I just feel that we're living at a time when we need to do more than tell the truth. We need to tell what you have to tell in a court of law. You have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I believe that there is a more integrative, whole person conversation that emanates from how we feel, that emanates from what our values are, that emanates from addressing things like national trauma, that must be part of taking us forward in the 21st century, such as when I talk about healthcare, that I talk about we can't just talk about healthcare, we also have to talk about creating the conditions of health. That's why in my whole health plan, which I will be coming out with within a week or two, there's a conversation about lifestyle. There's a conversation about preventative health. There's a conversation about how we actually not only pay for health care, but pay to create a more healthy society. And then for that, we're going to have to take on the food companies, have to take on the agricultural companies. When you look at what McDonald's, a McDonald's French fry in France is different than a McDonald's French fry in the United States because of things that in France aren't even allowed in.
Yes.
And the same thing with War and Peace. I'm having a more integrative conversation. We need a president who recognizes that we need the equivalent of the health and wellness space when it comes to war and peace. Because just like in the body, sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. Well, war is the absence of peace. Peace isn't just the absence of war. And none of that is just talk. All of that is policy change. That's why a Department of Peace, a peace academy, as well as a military academy. These are very specific policies, and anybody can go onto my website at Marianne 2020 and see all the issues. This is not just up in the air somewhere. There's a lot of human suffering that's been created by bad public policy, and we need to replace it by good public policy. Not just tweaking a little bit here and there. Not just treating symptoms, but really drawing a picture of what is possible for the United States and inhabiting the space of what it will take to make it happen. And by the way, I don't think of you, you said something you're just learning, you don't feel strong enough. That's a false perception. You are a grown woman. You are a mature American woman. You are a professional. Look at the platform that you have here. Part of what they do is try to make those who aren't in that club feel we're not qualified. That's not what the founders intended, Lisa. The founders intended, they didn't get that it's, also meant women, also meant black people, but that's very true. But the principle that they gave us is that the wisdom in all of us is just fine. Experienced politicians, Lisa, took us into Iraq. You might not be an experienced politician, but I bet you wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, that you've got a point there. You've got a point. Yes, I definitely have just raised my confidence level. Thank you for that. Speaking about issues, let's...
Girlfriend.
Thank you. Let's take a look here at Marianne's wonderful campaign on the commercial that she's running right now on reparations. Take a look. A lot of truth to this one.
One of the bigger issues that has really resonated with many people from the debates is the issue in and around reparations.
Yes.
This has been one of your core issues. Why?
I've been talking about this since my book came out in 1997. The first enslaved persons brought over in 1619. Slavery not abolished till 1865. That's 250 years, followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. That's 350 years of institutionalized violence. That's longer than this country has been in existence.
Paying reparations for slavery will not fix everything.
But America will not have the future that we want if we're not willing to clean up the past, to clean up this original character defect of racism.
Whatever it costs, it's time to do this. I'm Marianne Williamson, and I approve this message.
All right, so speaking of this issue, Marianne, I've seen you speak about this, and you are addressing something that is a historical, talking about the trauma of this country that started 300 years ago. We are still living in that place of trauma. And this is why we see the prison, the school to prison pipeline and everything that we're seeing. Where would you start with that? If you were to raise money for this, where would the money go? Would it be individuals? Would it be institutions? Where would you put the money?
When the government spends money, it's not like it has to raise money. The government has a lot of money. And remember, one of the things that I was saying earlier
Reallocation,
was that we're repealing that 2017 tax cut. That was a $2 trillion tax cut, closing those corporate subsidies, negotiating to lower drug prices, cutting military spending, the tax on the assets of the extremely wealthy. So that's your first answer. Now, what my plan is for reparations, and remember, Germany paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations after World War II. It doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. So I have proposed a plan of $500 billion to be dispersed over a period of 20 years. Now, remember, I just said $500 billion, but remember, compare that to the $2 trillion tax cut, and compare that to $760 billion that we spend every year on the military.
Yes.
So I'm talking about $500 billion over a period of 20 years, and it would be dispersed to a Reparations Council, and the Reparations Council made up of leaders from the Black community, from a broad array of academia and business and religion and politics and culture.
Yes, education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So the stipulation on the part of the United States government would be that the money is to be used for purposes of educational and economic renewal. And then within that, it is the job of this Reparations Council to decide specifically whether it is investing in historically Black colleges or it's investing in minority businesses, venture capital, whether it has to do with anti-discriminatory issues regarding gentrification.
So it would be collective decision-making and decentralized for the most part.
It would not be that decentralized. The decision-making would be controlled. That's a lot of money, and it would be controlled by this Reparations Council, which I see as being between 35 and 50 people.
Okay.
I mean, they would create committees, I'm sure, but no, it would not be. You can't just put out a lot of money like that and make it decentralized how that money is spent. There would be, and the appointment of the members of this council is obviously extremely important.
Yes.
Because they would have the responsibility, and it would have to be people obviously well established who have gained a lot of trust, not only from Black America, but from white America as well.
Okay, and then I appreciate that. And I also want to ask, because I want your opinions on the climate crisis, and I want your voice to be heard on that, because we didn't get to hear it on the town hall. So can you talk about some of your policies on climate control and climate crisis?
Yes. First of all, before we leave the topic of reparations, I just want to point out that reparations is an economic stimulus. It has been established that if Black families manifest as much wealth as as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger.
Wow.
So this money is a stimulus to the economy, far, far more than the $2 trillion tax cut to the very, very highest.
Which was supposed to be
money
an economic
does not
stimulus,
come.
yes.
Money doesn't come from a bunch of corporate aristocrats just dropping crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. That's not where money comes from. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. So I believe that all public policy should be built around one core principle, and that is what would help people thrive. And so anything, whether it's universal health care, free college, removing the college loans, anything that releases the spirit of people and helps people to be everything that they can be, produces money. And that's why something like reparations and everything else I just mentioned actually increases the economy. Now, the second thing you asked about was about climate change.
Yes.
And even with the climate change thing, I want to point out how the system is
Yes,
pretty rigged.
please do. Yes.
When they did the climate forum, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah, no, I
don't
do
wanna
want you to go there. I want you to go there. Yes.
Well,
I want to hear about that.
It's important. Well, it's important to remember that the DNC is a private corporation.
Yes.
It's not a governmental agency. It's not anything part of the election of officialdom or anything like that. So when I was sort of knocked off the debate stage, and we know the kind of interest that was created when I was on.
Yes.
Part of the problem of what happens there is that then all these people of these individual forums say we're only going to have people who are in the debates.
Yes.
So everybody's in cahoots with everybody. So there is this meme created that you're not in the race anymore. When you're very much in the race, you're just not on those debates, and then you're not in the forums because of the people who say. So you really see how a certain sort of incestuous club keeps it to themselves.
Who's making these decisions? Who's really making the decisions?
Well, it's the equivalent of what was years ago the back room, where party bosses,
individuals
sitting in back rooms.
Yeah.
And then media gets involved, and then you start seeing articles written about somebody and the same words said over and over again. That's when you know something's going on. But thanks to people like yourself, I'm out there. Everybody.
You are here.
What are my views about climate change?
Yes, yes.
We need a massive
Yes.
World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change. And we must act. We must act boldly, and we must act within the next 12 years. If we do not do what is necessary, not only in order to stop climate change, that's not enough. We must reverse climate change. And if we do not do that, we could be facing within 15 to 20 years a level of mass social collapse unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. We could have whole swaths of countries, whole swaths of continents that are literally uninhabitable because of the heat.
Yes.
And if it's uninhabitable because of the heat, that means you can't grow food there. Obviously, if you can't grow food there and you can't live there because it's too hot, people are going to leave. So then you have the following. You have massive food shortages, you have economic collapse, and you have possibly hundreds of millions of climate refugees, people who leave nowhere to go. Right now, we have 63 million people, displaced refugees. We see pictures of people getting on the boats from places like Syria, trying to get into places in Europe.
Yes.
We've seen some of the tragedies that have happened with boats that have capsized.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine what it will be. Imagine if we have hundreds of millions of people. So we must take bold action. We must enroll the entire society. We must shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We must sequester the carbon. This is not optional. We must sequester the carbon. We must reforest. We must invest in green energy. We must get to zero carbon emissions. And we absolutely must deal with the animal factory farming, because otherwise, even if we did all those other things, the nitrous oxide and the methane gas would be so great as to keep us stuck in the problem.
agree with all of this. And the next question is how? We have 2 million different environmental organizations out there already trying to make a difference. Where do you start? Because talk about big money. That controls every single, yes.
Elect a president who gets it. We now have an administration where the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is headed by an ex-coal industry guy. Before that, it was an ex-oil company guy. We need a world-class environmentalist as the head of the EPA. We need a president who puts the whole force of the executive power at the service of the EPA. And we also need to enroll some of these industries that have done industrial scale harm. We need to enroll them in doing industrial scale repair. I'll give you an example. If we're going to give $26 billion in corporate subsidies to oil and gas, why don't we say, okay, we'll give you some money. We'll incentivize you to start making the transition. And so we need to make what is often called a just transition.
Yes.
And, because there are thousands and thousands of people who do have jobs
who would lose their
that
jobs,
are related to dirty economy. But we need their creativity. We need their productivity. We need their manufacturing skills. We need their research and development. It's just like turning from a war economy to a peace economy.
And it would be healthier for them in the long run. And they're not working in these dirty environments. Yes.
Hello. It would be nice if we could leave this planet knowing, you know what, our grandchildren will probably be able to breathe. I mean, everybody gets that.
That's not a
But
joke. I mean, we really have a crisis.
It's not a
yes.
joke.
You wrote about this and you've spoken about this for decades. I want to take a look here at a video where you're talking about the power of manifestation through A Course in Miracles. Take a look at Marianne's teachings.
Could be possible. So I want to talk to you about what the Course in Miracles has to say tonight about an issue that we would think of in today's world as manifestation. First of all, when a woman is pregnant, the most powerful stuff going on, the most creative period of time is in the first 3 months before she even shows. Okay? So later, she seems to be getting larger and larger, and she's popping, and she's growing her belly, etc. But actually, the most powerful stuff was happening in those first 3 months. It all happens in those first 3 months, and then it just gets bigger and fills out. Okay. Same with life. It all starts inside. So we have, because we are an ego-oriented society, the Course in Miracles says that the world as we know it is dominated by a thought system based on fear. And so the big question that we ask is, what do I need to do to make it happen? So the first thing you're supposed to do, according to the ego's thought system, is figure out what you want. Figure out what you want to make happen, and then strategize what to do to make it happen. Right? Okay. Now compare that with the imagery of pregnancy. Okay? Now, the imagery of pregnancy is that something is growing inside you. And, you know, I remember once when I was pregnant with my daughter, I remember one day sitting there in an easy chair, drinking a cup of chamomile tea with my feet up on a pillow and thinking to myself, isn't it interesting? The action I can take right now that most serves the process of what is growing inside me is to simply sit here. And I have noticed how often that is true in almost every area of my life, that the most powerful thing I can do is reflect on what's happening and simply be here with this and allow it to grow inside me. Because from A Course in Miracles perspective, the issue is not that you are to figure out what you want to make happen and then, quote unquote, manifest your dreams. It would be more like God himself is dreaming through us. The Course in Miracles says you have an authorship problem. The authorship problem is we are taught that you are the generator of your life experience. You're taught that it's yours to figure out what you want and to go out and make it happen. Notice a lot of times in our society, this is termed as going out and taking the bull by the horns. And it takes a moment perhaps to reflect on what a suicidal thing that would be to do. But that's called success, and it's not a surprise that that's an image we have of success. But look how different that is. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, as opposed to I am going to let something be born. I'm going to allow myself to be pregnant. I'm going to allow my consciousness, just like a woman's body is the womb, right, out of which the child is born. In any creative effort or any life well lived, your consciousness is the womb out of which it can all be born. But
you have been teaching about this for a long time. In your book, A Politics of Love, you wrote about this, and this is a handbook for a new America. Can you tell us about that book and why people should read it to learn about you?
Well, I think A Politics of Love is a great handbook to the campaign if people want to go deeper and deeper into what the kind of policy changes that would be the externalized agenda of a new political direction in the United States. You know, Martin Luther King said that the desegregation of the American South was the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement, but that the ultimate goal was the establishment of the beloved community. So it's integrative. It's changes in our hearts and changes in our policies. That's why Martin Luther King also said we need qualitative shifts in our souls as well as quantitative shifts in our lives. So the kind of politics that's going to truly transform America, not just treat the symptoms, which will then come back when there's a different kind of president or morph into another symptom, is one which is integrated. It is one in which we go deep into our hearts and have a conversation about these things that is not just from the neck up.
But we really embody it.
Well, let's take the children alone. What has the political establishment done about the fact that we have 13 million hungry children, 100,000 homeless children, millions of American kids in classrooms that don't even have adequate school supplies, the cradle to prison pipeline,
there's nothing being
trauma,
done right now. Nothing being done right now. There's individual organizations that are trying to make a difference.
And governmental agencies. But this is a vast sea of human suffering. For the most part, what the political establishment has done is to simply normalize the despair of these children. Why is that? Because it's driven by an economic model. And that economic model says, improve your economy, and that will improve the lot of humanity. We need to have a whole paradigm shift. No, improve the lot of humanity, and that will improve your economy. So if you are looking at things from your hearts, you can't say, no, we're not going to talk about child poverty. This is why they don't want me on the debate stage. Because they don't want to have a debate about child poverty. They don't want to have a debate about child hunger. Why is that? Because children aren't old enough to vote, so there's no constituency there. Children aren't old enough to work, so there's no financial leverage there.
They're
so
future voters and future workers. Yes.
Well, that's not short-term gains.
It's not happening now. Yes, yes.
So when you approach these things from the level of the heart, a hungry child is not the last thing you talk about. When you approach these things from the level of the heart, a hungry child is the first thing you talk about. When you approach these things from the level of the heart, the first thing you do is go, oh, we've got to rescue these children before we do anything else.
Yes.
If you approach these things from the level of the heart, you recognize that we must have a sacred devotion to the earth, that this can't be optional, that we all must be part of this. When you look at these things from the level of the heart, you realize racism is our original character defect. We must atone in our hearts for these systems of systemic racism, racial disparity in criminal sentencing, mass incarceration, mandatory minimums. You look at them from the level of the heart and you go, oh, this must change. We can't ignore this. When you look at this from the level of the heart and you realize that large groups of desperate people are a national security risk, and that 12,000 children on this planet starve every day, and that American foreign policy should be built around alleviating human suffering everywhere, both in other parts of the world as well as here. Why? Because that's the greatest preventative if you want to avoid war in the future. So when you look at these things through the lens of the heart, you see political issues in a very different way. And that's what my campaign represents and what my presidency will represent if the people of the United States put me there.
And I thank you, and I ask you watching, I ask you to look into your heart. Does what Marianne is saying strike you in a way that you haven't looked at it before? Maybe to look at it from the lens of the heart. I ask you to ask yourself that question. And Marianne, I want to ask you, if you could have a prayer for America, what would that prayer be?
You know, we've all sung songs. God bless America. Crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And that's how this conversation started. That's how we used to think about this country. We used to sing God Bless America.
Yeah. Yes,
we are a good people. We are a good people. We simply have to make citizenship an aspect of what we think of as a well-lived life. And you don't have to know any more than you know. Just stand up for love. I think, you know, I read it somewhere, Lisa, that this reminds me of something you've said earlier. I read somewhere that for a woman to feel confident to share her opinion, she has to feel sure of 80% of her facts.
Yes, I have heard that.
For a man to feel confident to share his opinion, he has to feel 20% sure of his
yes.
So You know plenty. If you know what your heart says, things like, no, we're going to feed the babies. No, we're not going to poison the air.
Yes.
No, we're not going to poison the water. No, we're not going to poison the food. Your heart says that.
Yes.
Your heart has it right.
Yes.
And that's not bad economics. That's good economics.
We have to really look more than a short-sighted way. We need to look down the road, and it's coming faster than we realize. It always does.
What we should do when it comes to politics and public policy is what we do with personal life. Do the right thing. Do right by people. And people can go to my website at Marianne 2020 and look at the issues section. We have issues.
You
I have plenty of issues.
You have issues. And remember, your $22 makes a huge difference. And we ask you, thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you so much with all of my heart for everything that you are doing for all of us. Thank you.
God bless you. And thank you for being such a good girlfriend to me. I love you, Lisa. Thank you.
I love you too.
And to Gina also.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marianne. And I thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, just for listening with your heart and including this conversation in your heart. It makes such a huge difference. And at Free Speech TV, we do this. We have a more independent investigative journalism coverage more than ever. That's what we do on this on this incredible TV station. So we thank you so much for supporting us. If you would like to get A Politics of Love, a handbook for a new American revolution, you can also pledge your support here to Free Speech TV by calling 877-378-8669. And you can ask the volunteers in the phone room for Marianne's book, A Politics of Love. It is a conversation, a genuine conversation about having an affection for one another, really, truly understanding what that means from the heart, not just intellectual understanding, as Marianne says, but for an entire heart-based conversation. So thank you so much for being a part of this and this show. And thank you, Marianne. And until next time.
Thank you, honey.
I invite you all to stay aware. Thank you.